Hello and welcome. Thank you for clicking play on this awesome episode about digital wellness. You are going to love my conversation that I had with Dr. Gwenyth Jackaway. I just got done with it. I'm recording this afterwards and I am lit up and energized and so excited with everything she shared. Also, listen to the end because she gives us a special deal just for Love Your Life show listeners, which is just awesome. And I am so grateful she's on this show. So I will bring her on. I also want to mention that if you were interested in mindfulness and living more intentionally, that's what we're doing next month in the Love Your Life school. So get in there so I can support you. And maybe you hear something on this podcast episode that you're like, yeah, I want to do that. Well, come on in and I'll keep you accountable. Life coaches, good life coaches help you do the things you say you want to do. Our human brain pulls us off track. I can help you keep you on track. So come on to the Love Your Life School if you're interested. In the meantime, sit back, enjoy this fascinating and insightful and inspiring conversation with Dr. Jackaway. I just loved it. Thank you, warriors. Over. Hello and welcome to the Love Your Life show, Dr. Jackaway.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much for coming on. I wanted to have you on. We have lots of listeners who are in all stages of their lives. And your expertise around what you call digital wellness is something that I think will help all of us, whether we have kids, whether we, are feeling a little too controlled by our digital devices. And I mean, most of us have phones at this point. We're not, and if we don't, it's for a reason. So I would love just to sort of however you want to start telling us how you got into working with phones and digital and technology and all that, or if you just want to dive right into what digital wellness is to you.
Great. Now I'll give you a little background and thank you for those helpful prompting questions. So just a tiny bit of my own journey, because our backstories always inform our present, right? For almost 30 years, I was on the faculty at Fordham University in New York City in the Department of Communication and Media Studies. And so my academic scholarship and teaching was particularly focused on the impact of new media on our society. So media, not just the news media, but mediated communication. So we're doing that right now because you're somewhere else and we're using devices to communicate. So that's what mediated communication is. And so I've always been very interested in how the human experience changes when we widely adapt some new way to do it through a machine, right? So, for most of human history, there were only a few options, right? Speech, body language, clothing, dance, and music. And gradually new devices came along, were invented, and the ones that were widely adopted had a big impact. So, the printing press, the telephone, television. And part of why it has such a big impact is communication is such a central part of the human experience, right? We don't have wings, we don't have claws, we're not so great at surviving in nature without, doing something to adapt to it. We can't live as easily in nature as some of the other creatures, but we have this big forebrain and language and opposable thumbs, and we can cooperate sometimes. But in our ability to communicate is a really key, it's a key thing that differentiates us from the other species on the planet. Not that they don't communicate, but they don't make machines to extend their voices or extend their ability to see or hear. And now we can do that on a global level. So those are the kind of things I'm interested in. And new technologies are often a double-edged sword, to use a technology metaphor to talk about other technologies, right? So, swords and knives can be used for harm or for good, for surgery. You can make a sandwich, you could hurt somebody or yourself. So, these are tools and they can add a lot to our lives, which is why we keep inventing new ones. But there's often a dark side, and each generation that goes through a major change in communication technology the adults go through a kind of reaction period of, wow, this is different from when we were young. The young ones don't know any difference because this is the world they've been born into. And that often creates a kind of generation gap, literal generation gap in experience and understanding. For a very long time, those kind of changes only came along every few hundred years. So the people at the time had time to get used to it. And then in the last 200 years, they've been coming faster and faster.
Yeah.
Not just every few decades, but every few years. And, you think back, we didn't have cell phones when we were young. So that's in the scope of our own lifetime. And so our parents didn't have to grapple with, how do you raise kids in a digital environment? Our parents were worrying about television and various other kinds of aspects of pop culture and video games, but not social media and not these, addiction devices that we carry around with us all the time. So after teaching for many decades, and I finally reached that midlife moment where you take stock and wonder if there's anything else you want to be doing. And the answer for me was, I wanted to take what I was doing in the classroom, the college classroom, and bring it into the world and help people other than 20-year-olds who I adore, but that's a small part of the life cycle. So I'm also a mom, and I have a newly 21-year-old. So I've gone through that whole piece of the parenting journey and watched him navigate adolescence in this time of digital media. And so that and some other things motivated me to get involved with digital wellness. But I just want to pause and make some space if you wanted to ask any questions, and then I'll tell you about digital wellness.
No, I'm so glad that you gave us that history, because I was just thinking, yes, my parents, like just everything you said, like how changes are happening sooner, and also just even thinking of my parents. I do remember we had arguments about the phone, but it was more like me trying to convince my parents to get call waiting, or to
Right.
get, like when that answering machine first came out, and it's just such a different world.
That's right.
And that these changes are happening really quickly. And what I love about your work and why I wanted you on the podcast is because you do address that positive and negative, like the pros and the cons, and that there is all that. So yes, thank you for that backstory and sharing some of your expertise, and also getting out of the classroom so you can help all of us. So could you explain a little what digital wellness means to you?
Sure. Well, so first of all, it's not my term. It's a new field. And it's a field that is evolving. And, just like, remember we used to call it the information superhighway?
Yes.
What happened to that? Right. So, things evolve in their nomenclature. Right now, people are calling this either digital well-being or digital wellness. Sometimes people talk about tech life balance, which is just a little wordier.
Yeah.
But they all deal with a similar set of issues about helping us make healthier choices about in our relationship with our technology, how to take agency in our relationship with devices that are intentionally created to promote addiction or overuse. And I'm interested in that for all ages, because I don't think young ones are unique in their ability to get extremely attached to these devices, and that's not an accident. And I'll tell you some more about the tech design in a moment. But the other thing that brought me to this particular kind of work is, in addition to my many years as a media professor, I also have had a lifelong meditation practice. And I never thought of them as related. One supported the other, and it helped me as a mom and just as a human, but I didn't really think about them as connected until about 12 years ago. And I started seeing everyone walking around the streets of New York City, looking down at their screens, and on the subway, looking down, and sitting in faculty meetings, and everyone is looking down. And you go to the restaurant and I suddenly hit me, everyone is doing a screen meditation, because I'm a meditator. So I I see the world, through that lens sometimes. And then I realized, wow, we can bring mindfulness, which is a kind of meditation, to our relationship with our devices. So just like you can learn to eat mindfully as opposed to mindlessly, where you just kind of shovel the food in and, watch TV and don't even notice what you're eating, and you can learn to, take a mindful walk with your dog, or, have a mindful moment with the sunset. We can bring mindfulness to our relationship with our devices. So, and then I found my way to digital wellness. So the way digital wellness is explained is under the larger heading of wellness, which, as I'm sure you're aware, is now a big industry. But in addition to being a set of businesses, it's a mindset about thinking about our own wellness from a kind of holistic perspective. So we need enough sleep, and we need to be hydrated, and we need to eat, balanced diet, and we need to get exercise, et cetera, right? So the statistics about how many hours people are spending per day on their phones or on their computer screens, or both simultaneously, are kind of jaw-dropping. And basically for many people, if we're awake, we're on our screens in some way or another, unless we're doing something where the screen is actually it's not possible to use it, like in the bathtub. And I'm sure people find ways to do that too, but it's true for people of all ages. So anything we're doing that much, we ought to be considering it as a potential component of our wellness, our health and well-being. So digital wellness is about developing practices that help support healthy, balanced use of these technologies in a way that allows us to take advantage of the benefits, because there are many, and also to be aware of, and then to be able to steer clear of some of the potential drawbacks.
Yeah.
So that's the initial answer.
I love how you bring the focus of meditation and mindfulness and intention into this. I am, a firm believer, and research backs me up, that an intentional life feels better. It feels like I know this for when I'm with my own phone. If I sit down and say to myself with intention, you're going to be on Instagram for 20 minutes, I feel way better after that 20 minutes than if I'm just sort of walking through to go make lunch, pick up my phone, almost stand there in a trance. I'm on Instagram for 20 minutes, and then I'm like, what? And it's all about that attention or that mindfulness. So I love thinking of digital wellness. And yes, developing practices that support the good, and looking at where, because how anything can be used against us. So thank you. So keep talking. Tell us about it. Yeah.
I'll tell you some more. So you were talking about intention. One of the aspects of digital wellness that I like to emphasize is the idea of intentional attention. So it rhymes, so that makes it easier to remember. So, where we put our attention, right? Like my attention is on you, but I could turn and look at my dog who's sitting over there. And if I were talking to you like this, after a while, I think you might get annoyed, right? But that's kind of what happens when you're talking to a person and suddenly they just kind of disappear into the phone place, right? So intentional attention, it's a fascinating thing to think about attention. We use that word like we know what it means, but it's one of those words, if you really ponder it, like, well, what is that? Right? I like to think of it as like a spotlight or a flashlight or like a telescope, so it's like there are other things I could be attending to, like how does my back feel, or there's this annoying noise coming from outside, but I can focus my attention in on you. We can breathe mindfully. Like, where are we putting our attention? It's one of the few things we have some real choice over, especially if there's not an emergency happening. Like if there's an emergency happening and there's a loud sound or, worse happening, then it's hard to stay peaceful in the middle of that. Although ultimately, if you're really skilled at mindfulness, you can find that calm place in the middle of a storm. But when things are relatively peaceful, then we have some choice. And, part of what digital wellness is for me is becoming aware that you have choice over where you put your attention, and then making that choice over and over.
I like that. Like, where is your spotlight right now? I know the listeners really like it when we've said before, like, be where your feet are, or that like present grounding. But then I like adding on that, like, where's my spotlight? Is my spotlight on, Dr. Jackaway, or is my spotlight on my dog? Or even just also, as humans, as you said before, like, we have this great ability to think about what we're thinking about. So our spotlight might be on our son, who's thousands of miles away, while our husband is sitting there talking.
Exactly.
I really appreciate that tool. Thank you. Yes.
Great. You're welcome. So now let's start talking about, since you mentioned your son, and I have one too, let's bring in the younger ones.
Yeah.
So, and I want to also explain that part of why I'm here with you is, in addition to my own work teaching digital wellness, I am the educational consultant for a company called Carrots and Cake. So Carrots and Cake is a parental control learning platform that helps parents teach kids how to practice some of this digital wellness, and also to make devices less addictive and more beneficial for kids. So I'll tell you more about that in a moment, how that works. So I'm a parent educator for Carrots and Cake. And the reason it's called Carrots and Cake is I love this thinking behind the name. We should eat our vegetables before we have dessert. So the idea of Carrots and Cake is to promote learning before the use of some more playtime kind of apps. And I'll tell you more about how that works in a moment. But part of why they founded it, so it was founded by a couple who have 2 young kids, and during COVID, as many parents experienced during COVID, was kind of like screen time limits went out the window as parents were working from home and needed to keep their kids quiet. And the couple who founded Carrots and Cake found kids were doing a lot more tantruming when it was time to come off their devices. And so before I explain more about how Carrots and Cake works, I think it would be helpful to talk a little bit about the neuroscience of digital addiction or digital habituation, or why it is that we all get hooked on screens, and then why it's particularly challenging to get little ones and teenagers to come off their devices. So first, I want to talk about persuasive design, which has to do with Silicon Valley and the way our devices have been built, and particularly some of the most addictive platforms. So things like YouTube and Instagram and Threads and Twitter and TikTok, Snapchat, and all of those. So the folks at Silicon Valley have at their disposal all kinds of consultants from neuroscience and psychology who have helped them figure out how to keep us coming back for more. And things like the like button or the retweet or the share button, or right. So these are social media, and we are social creatures. And in order to, survive and thrive, we need to be liked by our tribe, and we need to have a community. And in the digital age, a lot of our community is online. And it feels good when somebody likes your picture or likes your post. And that gets us into some of the neuroscience. But first, I just want to emphasize, this is not a conspiracy theory. Like, if you listen to the people who created these things talk about it, they're very upfront. And you can learn more about this on a wonderful documentary called The Social Dilemma, which is on Netflix and easy to find. And it was created by some of the folks, we'll say refugees, escapees, people who've left Silicon Valley and who've now devoted themselves to telling everybody else how that business model works. So why do they want people to come back and back and back for more? Well, if you think about how social media works, it's free, right? What do you pay for your Instagram subscription?
Yeah.
Right. So there's a reason for that, which is that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And you just absorb that. You are the product. What does that mean? Your behavior online is the valuable data. They want to see, where do you go online? What things are you liking? What things are you listening to? What are you subscribing to? And that's why you know, when they ask, this website gathers cookies, that's what that's all about. They're tracking what you're doing. Why? It's not really some big brother thing, although it could be used for that. The more they know about what you're interested in, they can feed you more stuff that you're going to come back for more. And why is that valuable? Because they can then have all that data and sell your data to an advertiser. So I'm going to make something up here. I'm guessing you're interested in health and wellness and mindfulness. So anytime you visit such websites, that's recorded, and then they're going to send you content or advertising for products like that. And that's the business model. So of course they want us to come back more and more and more, because the longer you're there, the more they find out about you. Okay, and that's also true for our kids online and our kids' behavior online, which is part of why setting up privacy settings for younger users is so essential. When we see, now here's a little neuroscience, when we see a like, we get a flood of neurotransmitters. So there's several neurotransmitters that are involved with our kind of addictive experience with these devices. Neurotransmitters are chemicals that allow the different parts of the brain to talk to each other. Your listeners will probably familiar with serotonin, right, which is associated with various kinds of antidepressants. And when people are experiencing depression, they often have a lower serotonin level. So there are medicines that help with that. Another neurotransmitter is dopamine. Now, dopamine is a very important neurotransmitter. It helps us get things done. So that motivated feeling you have, like if you just sit down and you're hunting for, you know, a new pair of snow boots, or you're just going online to look for vacation options, and there's that like, ooh, let's see what I can find. That feeling is dopamine. And it's what helped our ancestors find mates and food and shelter, and it still plays a role in those things. But it, you know, it helps us get motivated, and it can get linked with adrenaline, and so you can feel like really on. And if you watch the faces of people at in Las Vegas, gambling, or watch the face of somebody playing in a video game, there's that like hyper focus. So that can feel good for a while. And then when you know, level up in your game, or you win the money, or you know, saw that someone likes your post, you get flooded with some other things, serotonin, oxytocin, which is the love hormone. Oh, I'm loved. Look how this love I'm getting online. That feels good. So that's the reward. And that's what keeps us coming back. Now, for so self-control and self-regulation and things like discipline, like I'm going to put my phone down now, that's handled by the neocortex, the frontal cortex, the part of the brain that handles those kinds of things: self-control, emotional self-regulation, things that we associate with maturity. And that part of the brain is not done growing till you're 25, which is, car insurance companies have known that for a long time. It's taken some of the rest of us a while to catch on, because and so teenagers engage in a lot of risk-taking behavior, partly because they're exploring life, but also that part of the brain is not fully developed. So they're not thinking very far ahead. This feels good, I want to do it. That part of the brain that says, but how are you going to feel tomorrow morning? It's not really
not
online yet. Okay. And now when you think about kids, and now I'm thinking, you know, ages like 3 to 10, even before they get on social media, or at least theoretically, that's before they're on social media. And let's say you hand them an iPad. So now we'll get, you know, to the COVID moment, and you've got to go on Zoom, and you need your kid to be quiet, and you hand them a pad, right? And they are blissfully quiet while you need to do the thing. And then you say, okay, it's time for dinner. And and then there's an explosion. Okay, so what's going on then? So that part of the brain for them is very underdeveloped, and they're having all this fun, and suddenly they have to stop, and they're flooded with dopamine, and it's real, and mom, it's the middle of the game, and so they literally don't have the brain capacity to easily disengage. And also the tantruming is, so emotional self-regulation is also governed by the neocortex. And so tantrums, right? Adults don't tantrum as much, although some adults do, but children cry multiple times a day and adults tend not to. And, so that because that comes online. All right. So, I'm going to pause here and because I don't want to speak nonstop. If there's questions.
No, I mean, I appreciate all this. I actually have a parenting teens class where I talk about this and about that part of the brain and how, as parents, it's our job to set boundaries and guidelines. So I guess I'd love to sort of jump into how then, could we start with adults? Like, how do you suggest promoting digital wellness with adults? Like, are there certain, one or two things
Sure.
like if someone was interested in their own digital wellness and that, intentional attention, where might you direct them? And then I'd love to talk about kids.
Great. Well, luckily it all goes together. So
good.
because when people ask me what's one thing that they can do to help their kids develop digital wellness, I say, look in the mirror.
Yeah.
Because, and that's not out of blame or shame, just, anybody who's a parent knows that kids are watching us. So if they're seeing you with your face on your phone all day, then that's been modeled for them, especially if they're very little. Like, they really don't know a world without this. Right? So they think that's what you're supposed to do. So then to come down hard on kids for having their phones, right? That's, start with yourself. So a few tips that I give for adults, and then this was especially important for parents. Let's see if I can give you a few key ones. Don't sleep with the phone right next to your pillow. You are unavailable unless you have a really sick relative, or you're have a newborn. I understand that there's some people who, or if you're in emergency services or something, but if your life is such that there's unlikely to be some, right, you don't even have to put it in a different room. It could be on, so that you could hear the ring, but put it on the other side of the room.
Yeah, I was going to say, because even there, like, I hear my listeners, like you say, don't sleep with bed by their, the phone by their pillow. And they're like, but, and then you say, unless you're in an emergency situation, our brain can argue for all, but I have a kid at college, but and I just want to say, like, exactly what you said, then start with it on the other side of the room. Like, my phone is not in airplane mode when I sleep. It is on, but it is in the other room. And whenever there's been a true emergency, I have heard it. Which has been, I think, once since I've had a cell phone, so it's like for all those other nights. Yeah. So I think that unless bucket, we want to be very small listeners.
Very small, and literally just, put it out of reach. The idea is to put some speed bumps, those speed bumps that slow down cars. If it's right next to your head, it's just right there. And when we're sleepy, our self-control is a little less.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So, that means that if you're reaching for it, you're doing it with intention. Easy things to do that if you haven't already, if your listeners haven't already done this, it's just basic. So turn off the notifications that come up on your screen. So when you open your screen, when you first turn on your phone, right, I just have a drawing on there. You should not be seeing all sorts of messages from, anywhere that you get messages. Email, Instagram, any of this, they'll still all be there. But it's this extra step of, check, I'm going to go to that screen and check that, because if it's right there on your screen when you pick it up, it somehow seems like an emergency. turn
and
off.
this is where I just like to, like with listeners, just remind them like, to know themselves, and to also bring your knowledge of what you just said about the persuasive design, and then to know ourselves. Like I know myself that if that phone is anywhere near me in the middle of the night, it's going to be more habitual. I'll be reaching for my phone. I don't know what I'll be doing. I might be checking the weather in Siberia. Like, I don't care. It's just something. So to know yourself with that, also with notifications, I know people who say that doesn't bother them. I say, well, then just turn it off. Cause I like what you're saying there. Again, we're trying to just delay that urgency, that rush of adrenaline that addiction has gotten us. And it's being more intentional of, okay, and now I'm going to check my email, versus the phone giving you a notification that you got a new email, and then us needing to use our brain power. Most of my listeners have a lot of other things they could be using their brain power on. So it's
That's
like,
right.
why are we fighting against ourselves? So I really appreciate that.
Well, and not only are we fighting against ourselves, we self-interrupt constantly. So, life interrupts from the outside, but there's all kinds of statistics and a lot of people who are studying now attention span, and the argument's been made for a while that our attention span is decreasing. We certainly interrupt ourselves more and more and more. So the figures about how frequently people check their phones is kind of staggering. And that's not someone else interrupting you. That's you voluntarily picking up this interruption machine.
Yeah, going for that hit of dope. Yes.
Right. So other things, be sure that you create some activities and some time in your life when you're not engaging with your device. And then I can hear, but so like I have a little dog and I take him for a walk and I bring my phone, but I have a commitment to be present with him and just experience the walk. Rather than walking down the street, scrolling and holding the leash, and then I'm not present with him, I'm missing the day. So, carve out some moments in your daily activities where the phone isn't part of it.
So what I'm hearing overall, I just sort of want to put a bow on this for the listeners, is make decisions ahead of time. That will not be a new concept for them. Make decisions ahead of time that best serve you. And that's sort of the wellness. So you decide ahead of time, I'm going to turn off the notifications. I'm not going to keep the phone by my bed. And maybe I'm going to eat all meals with phones away, or I'm going to take, 1 5-minute walk a day with, or I'm not going to bring my phone with me when I walk with my husband after dinner. Or like, it's deciding ahead of time. And to just start there. We don't need to do everything at once, but it's using what I call that adult brain, like our decision-making power of the future, like, okay. And then knowing in the moment when you go to bed tonight, your brain is going to be like, no, you need the phone by your bed. What if, great Aunt Louise calls you and you're just like, yes, brain, it's okay. And I'm going to try this. And that's breaking that habit, that addiction, that digital addiction. And
it's some of it's habits and some of it's addiction. And as I'm sure that's a complicated, blurry line, but I once heard the definition of addiction. It's a simple one. It's something you have trouble stopping, and that's worth it. I know it's not a medically, but if it seems really hard, it's probably worth trying.
Yeah. Like, why
and
not?
The other thing that I'll recommend that I have found this very useful, and then I want to talk about the children, is resist the temptation to have the phone be the very first source of input to your brain in the morning. So I have a practice of, before I pick up my phone, I make a cup of tea. I'm fortunate that I don't live such a high-paced life, but that can take 10 minutes. Just check in with yourself before you let the world come flooding in, because you don't know what's going to be there when you open up your phone, and then bang, it might set the whole day. So check in with yourself first, have a breath, check in with your body, and then you go online intentionally.
It's that intention again, and you're definitely motivating me. I'm recognizing that, like, usually I haven't done that, but since I'm on the other side of the world right now, like 2 of my kids and then a lot of my clients are awake when I'm sleeping. And I do have like my text messages I can see on my home. I don't get on them, but I see them. And my brain, I just want to share this with listeners. My brain is telling me, oh, it doesn't really bother you. Like, it's not really similar to what I've heard people say, like, oh, notifications don't bother me. And so now you're motivating me today, and I'm committing to the Love Your Life show list. I'm turning those off. I'm putting on my silent, because if my kids, if there's a true emergency, they know to call twice and they'll get through. If otherwise, it is affecting me, and just to take back that intention of how we're starting the day. So thank you.
That's right.
How
You're
can
welcome.
we help kids?
Okay, so as I mentioned, the first thing you can do is by being a good model for them. And then, the next step would be to introduce it as a topic in the family. Now, depending on how old your kids are, you may get more kind of pushback. And so for those with the little ones, you're very fortunate because you get to start them off right. But even if you have older kids, and maybe if you have a partner, or, whoever's in the house, if this has not been something that has been a topic in the family, you can say, I'd like to start to talk about the role of devices in our family life. You start it there, like, how do devices impact our time with each other? So if when we're together, we're always also have like these other people with us who are there with us remotely, and at any moment somebody might exit virtually, and that doesn't create a space for mindful connection. So, you can start by making small changes. So maybe it's just one meal a week where there's no devices, or one meal a day where there's no devices, or at least one activity as a family once a week where you play a board game or play cards or have a discussion, right? Something where everyone isn't also connected digitally to the world.
Yeah, I really like how you take that as a team approach there, which is super helpful in terms of, we do a lot of work here about like setting up good communication, instead of being like, you're always on your phone, but more of a questioning, curious, like, how do we think digital devices are affecting us? And if your kids are teenagers and still living in your house, they're going to have ideas, but it's not that targeted, like you're on your phone all the time, or your husband, like you're on the phone all the time. And then again, starting small, one meal, that's more like one meal is better than no meals, or one, walk. And again, I just want to reemphasize with parents, because I do a lot with parents and teenagers, and one of our jobs as parents is to set boundaries. So to say like, okay, dinner's going to be cell-free. From like, we're starting now, and let's try it. It's going to be hard for me, for all of us. Like, our phones are going to be over there, whatever. Second job as a parent is to let them have their feelings. They're not going to be, I did this as a mom. They're not going to be like, great idea, mom. I'm so glad you're clearing my brain from distraction. No, they like, let them have they're going to be disciplined. They might say some things like, mom, that's the worst thing ever. You're ruining my social life. It's like, I totally get that. So that's part of where all our other skills come up, but that starting small, what works for your family. Yes.
I think that for teenagers, the more they understand about how it all works, the better. So the film, The Social Dilemma, is totally appropriate for, I would say, ages about 13 or 14 up. And they feature a family, and there's actually a scene in the story where the mom decides, phone's at the table, and, there's a whole drama around that. But I think that just announcing it without any backdrop might get more pushback. So I think that's why if you share the film with teenagers, or just share some information with them, like, do you know why we don't pay for this? Because you're the product. Teenagers love to find out how adults are like up to no good. And so, like, help them to understand that their activities online are being monitored and bought and sold. Like that, that for some of them, that will be interesting. And it's like, try it for an hour. It doesn't have to be a whole lifestyle transformation. Now, when it comes to little ones, the benefit is that parents still do have a lot more control over, the lives and lifestyles of the youngest ones. And so, theoretically, they're not on social media, but they are, many of them, quite active on iPads, or if they don't have their own cell phone, they get to use their parents' cell phones. And this is where something like Carrots and Cake comes in. So let me tell you a little bit more about how it works. So as I mentioned, the idea of carrots and cake is you learn first and play later.
Mm.
And I like that it's a food metaphor because, just like we are what we eat, we also are what we take into our
I
brain
like
in
that.
an ongoing way. So this is about the digital nutrition.
Mm.
So, and some people might say, wow, it's an app. You're using technology to help a problem with technology. What is that? One of the things I love about carrots and cake is that it's not anti-technology. These technologies are here to stay. So while there are some families who make a choice, we're not going to provide these technologies in the house, it can only last for so long.
Mhm.
Eventually they grow up and they will start to use these things. And there's a lot of benefits to be derived. There's so many educational apps and so many wonderful educational websites. The thing is that just like you wouldn't let a child go wandering through Times Square alone
Right.
without supervision, just handing a kid an iPad with no limits on it is not a great idea.
Mhm.
Plus, if you hand them an iPad that has Duolingo and YouTube or TikTok,
Right.
just like imagine putting on a plate broccoli and dessert.
Okay, great. Yeah.
So they don't have that prefrontal cortex, and even adults would probably gravitate
Right.
towards the dessert first. And so the order in which the kids do things on the app makes a difference. It can help them develop various kinds of skills, including delayed gratification.
I was just going to say that. I love that. Yeah.
Right. So there's all kinds of studies that show that the ability to develop delayed gratification in childhood and in youth is a big predictor of success later in life, whatever, however one defines success, because in real life, we're not constantly getting likes and, power ups and new lives. We have to work hard, and eventually sometimes we get to our goal, and the ability to delay gratification is great. And so the way the app works, so parents, it's an easy download and an easy setup, depending on the age of your child. There's some prompts and you can set it up, and you determine what are the carrots, which are the predetermined learning apps, which you can download, free downloads from the App Store, or approved websites like PBS Kids, or things that are, Duolingo, Khan Academy. You pick those, and then you pick some approved cake, whatever it is that your child likes, and they can have some agency and, with your approval. And then you decide how much time so when you hand them the device, they must do the carrots, learning apps, and then for a certain amount of time, and then they can get their cake time. And then, because as we know that it helps kids transition if you give them some warnings, like 2 more minutes, 1 more minute, there's a countdown, and then the device is not going to work anymore. And it also, you can block access to the internet entirely, so they can only get access to the things that you've approved. And the initial things are high cognitive load, so they're more demanding, right? Learning apps, and then not as much dopamine. So they're not all flooded with dopamine already. And then they get their cake time and they get some warnings. And our users, this is a relatively new company, but our users are reporting that their kids' use of carrots and cake has tripled their use of learning apps and has cut their overall screen time in half. And there's fewer tantrums, and the kids are no longer digital zombies, and it elevates learning time and helps families model a balanced approach. And it also teaches them that things end, like there's no end to Instagram, and there's no end to TikTok. You ever notice that? Did you ever get to the bottom of Instagram? No, there is no bottom, right? But, movies end, TV shows end. It's useful for them to understand, like, you get time on this, and then we put it away.
So all the facts you just shared are very real, that, parents are reporting. What I also want to reinforce with my listeners that I love is, when I've looked at it, what it also takes out is the nagging that we sometimes can have, is like, oh, 5 more minutes, or, have you done this yet? Or this, like, that's gone. And also the mom guilt that I used to have, where it's like, oh, they're on the screen. Are they doing the right thing? You
Right.
sort of remove that. And so I guess whether it's carrots or cake, or it's you coming up with something intentionally, for the families that maybe are more limiting with screen time, the thing that we're trying to reinforce here is having like one sort of overall discussion of, and one overall setup of the carrots and cake. Like, it might take a little longer to, you download, it doesn't take long at all. I did it, but like, you download the app, you figure it out, all of that. And that short-term discomfort leads to long-term ease, which is what we're usually doing the opposite of the short term. We like avoid the short term, talking or setting an intention, and then we have long-term discomfort. So we go for the short-term ease for long-term discomfort. And instead, I really see carrots and cake as a magical type device that really helps with the mom guilt and the nagging. And so I'll put links for it in the show notes for sure. And also the social dilemma in there. Is there any place else, before we finish up, that you want to?
Well, one thing that I want to thank you for your lovely feedback about carrots and cake. Your users can have a 60-day free trial. So if you go to carrotsandcake.com, it's those 3 words, carrotsandcake.com, and you use the code word love your life all together, like one long thing, love your life, and they can have the download. And if you have any questions, the tech folks will be happy to answer them, but they'll prompt you with a few questions of how old the child is and some of their interests. And then there'll be some recommended educational apps so that you don't have to start from scratch there, although you can. And that can help
for that. That's
help
so
the
exciting.
journey.
You have given us so much today, so much information. I really loved hearing sort of the history of where this all came from, and then moving forward with, the power of our intentional attention and all of it, and the practical tips and tools. And now I'm turning off my notifications at night. Great. And 60-day free trial of carrots and cake. Thank you so much, Dr. Jackaway. I am so
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
excited. Thank you so much for coming on the show.